book is excellent. It goes into talking a lot about private military companies, and especially the Wagner Group and how they were organized. And he also talks a lot about, he compares that to organized crime. And that was interesting to see how, like Kimura was from Naples, was setting up their training, and how also Wagner Group had set up their training. And then how far back it went to, like, I think it was the 15th century. He was talking about the Franciscan orders at the time, and how they could go in and occupy land and conquer a place. Very interesting book. A lot of comparisons in there, especially to management. And I made sure it's very relevant to what's going on today. A lot of nations, and there's a lot of war, a lot of conflict. There will always be war and conflict. And it's kind of like, how are nations going to do this? Most nations, like even in the United States, we're a huge bureaucracy. Even the military is. You have to have orders, and that goes up the chain of command. And it takes a long time to get decisions made and money spent. And it's not necessarily profitable. And that was something that was interesting that I read in there. I have several quotes in there that I wrote down. And let's go ahead and mention it. Since I mentioned profit, let's start with this quote. The goal of armies is to defend the nation, to win the fight, whereas the goal of PMCs is profit. And that was on page 113. I thought that was very interesting, because it is true. You're not going to start a company unless you can make a profit. Governments, though, their profits, they're not in the business of profit. They're in the business of spending taxpayer money, of spending money. And so that creates this huge bureaucracy. So the PMCs, the private military contractors, are designed to make profit. And then that depends on who they have their contracts with. Is it a government contract? He talked a lot about the differences between Wagner and Blackwater. Well, Blackwater, when it was operating overseas, it was on different government contracts. And their primary role was a support role, not a offensive warfare. Let's take land and hold and seize capitals or seize cities or anything like that. They were there protecting people for the most part. So yeah, they were there making profit, and the guys that were getting paid there were making very good money. Kind of like even in the Wagner Group, but I see that they had actually went in to create political change in areas like in Africa and support interest for the nation and Russian interest, but also they were seizing and taking land. And so he did a really good job of contrasting a lot of that in the book. But that was one quote that I really liked. The PMC exists because of the following formula. Civilized people are incapable of facing challenges of an uncivilized nature. And that was, that's very true. A lot of people that are civilized will pay other people to go and do things that they can't do. And war is definitely one of those things. If it needs to be done, then that's why armies typically recruit the young to go and fight. They can take them through a basic training, teach them what they want them to learn, and give them discipline, and then send them off to fight because they haven't been civilized over 30, 40, 50 years. So I found that very interesting. Yeah. So, but the book is very good, and it is very relevant to what's going on today. There's a lot of lessons in there, especially lessons on management and organization. Let me give you another quote, because I wrote down several quotes. and this was very good. This is something that is being taken advantage of on both sides. And here's the quotes from page 148. But the reality is that war is a learning process. It happens during the conflict, not because of prior classroom training. You can have your classroom training, but that's based on previous experience, previous war. Once you get into the conflict, that's when the learning actually really takes place, if people pay attention. Uh, in the current war between Ukraine and Russia is exactly that. The North Koreans sent troops there and equipment. China has sent equipment. What works, what doesn't work. They're all learning what's going on. And even the Western nations, you're going to send the Leopard tank in. Well, you're going to get the results of what's going on with that back. So it's constantly a learning process if people are paying attention to what's going on. And the PMCs definitely do that. So anybody that gets, especially from like the Wagner group, he was talking about in the book that the classroom is kind of done with a training module, practical exercises. Whoever survives that, that's the natural selection that they have that's going on. And then that knowledge is passed on because you had survived and adapted that. So, but PMCs are going to do that a lot quicker and a lot faster in most cases than governments will, just because of how streamlined it is and how people are, they realize how quickly people are their resource to use to make that money and profit. So when they come back from their practical experience on the front lines, that's a nice way of putting it, is a practical exercise. When they come back, they're going to pass that information on, regroup, and go back out and work again. Oh, absolutely. It should. This book should absolutely be read so that bureaucracies are starting to change what they are doing and how they go about things, how they are going about their organization, streamlining things and looking at getting what I would say the best bang for their buck. You know, you want to maximize exactly what's going on within your military so you're not wasting money and you're not wasting time. And that's how you effectively defend the nation. So this book should absolutely be looked at about how they are going about doing what they're doing. You know, in the United States, we've been fighting the war on drugs since the late 1970s, early 80s, 1980s, a long time, and we're not even close to stopping what's going on. You know, fentanyl comes across our southern border and kills close to, I believe, about 100,000 people a year that overdose off of fentanyl. And that's now just being kind of shut down because they are changing and adapting at the border what they're doing. And hopefully we'll see the results of that. But every time you change and adapt, the enemy always changes and adapts to what you're doing. And that's why you have to be able to do that quicker, faster, and be more cost effective at that and maintain your resources. And this book helps with that an awful lot. It's very, very good, very interesting. Yeah, knowledge is passed on through survival and is adapted. So, yeah, very cool. Very, very good. Very scary and very dangerous. See, we were talking about private military companies, the PMCs. What he brings up in the book about the PMAs, private military administrations, hasn't really been seen to its full effect yet. But you look at some companies now, and especially the Wagner Group, he was talking a lot about it being a hydra that just kind of fanned out, but had several tentacles that were in doing so many different things. Now, once you get a mechanism involved that can actually do that, that's a very scary mechanism. Yeah, it's going to be very efficient. You know, a military runs on logistics and supplies. So if you are a PMC, that is, or now a PMA, that can control your own supply chain, your own logistics, and move all those supplies to where you need to be. You have your own helicopters, you have your own supply planes, you have your own medical. And we started seeing this with Blackwater. They also had their own intelligence group. Now, a lot of times, and he'd mentioned intelligence in with PMC Wagner as being a reconnaissance. But we also think about intelligence as kind of like a structure like the CIA or the KGB, how you have spies that are out there constantly gathering human information, as well as open source information, as well as now satellite information. And they're pulling all these resources. So you have your own supplies, your own logistics, your own medical, your own doctors, your own surgeons, and you have your own intelligence gathering mechanisms to all funnel into one headquarters, one place to make decisions. You have your own boats. You have your own training facility. You can airdrop people and airdrop supplies. You can do, wow, yeah. You're talking about a force now that's very scary. And, we hadn't talked about the use of drone warfare. They're talking here in the United States that maybe some of our big predator drones are not as effective as using small individual drones out on the battlefield. And now that technology is getting added into warfare, which I was looking at back 10, 15 years ago when our troops were engaged in Afghanistan and into Iraq. If I can launch a drone and go 2 streets over to get an aerial view of where troops are moving or enemy combatants are moving, wow, that's real source intelligence that's going on in real time. And that gives you a lot of information. And we're seeing that. We're seeing how the drones are being used to blow things up, to kill people, of course, and as well as to gather intelligence and to direct artillery fire, weapons fire, all of that in the battlefield. Now, the drones that are being used are starting to change. They're putting drones in surface warfare on the oceans and with underneath the oceans now that are remote controlled. They are starting to put some of the drones are like fiber optic wire led, so you can't jam their radio transmissions. They are also putting artificial intelligence in drones. And I always tell people that Arnold movie, that movie made by Arnold Schwarzenegger back in the 80s, Terminator. Okay, now you start looking at, man, what are we creating? Are we creating drones that will eventually hunt us down? If you can imagine, I remember Ukraine was sent by one European country what they called mosquito drones, and they were a drone that could fit in the palm of your hand, and they were sent like 1,000 of them. Now I don't know what they were being used for. I can only imagine that they were definitely used to gather intelligence. But as technology advances, who's to say that you won't put artificial intelligence inside a small drone like that? So it can go and take care of its own mission. Anyway, that's going kind of on a whole other subject. But the PMCs, or, the administrations now, the private military administrations, they will look at every possibility. They're using drones, wheeled drones and tracked drones on the battlefield to get supplies to where they need to go. Well, eventually they're going to be evacuating wounded by using these types of drones. There was a demonstration being done by, and a lot of people have seen it, by the little drone dog. It's a robot. And so, you're walking down a trail, and now all of a sudden this thing pops up out of the ground. That's a small little robot dog that's got a machine gun on it. I mean, where are we going to stop? And the Geneva Conventions, when they were put in place, didn't foresee any of this going into warfare. So maybe that will be something that gets looked at, and there's another Geneva Convention. And the Geneva Convention was, how do we treat enemy combatants? How do we engage in land warfare or sea warfare? But that might be addressed now with the private military companies, and also with the drone warfare, and things are changing so fast, and nations should be learning. I never thought that I would see the amount of trench warfare come back again that we'd seen previously in previous wars, like World War I, and even in the Civil War and wars dating back, trenches have always been used, and now trench warfare is being used again, and the numbers are just absolutely horrendous when you look at the damage of life. What is next if the private military companies really do get entrenched in the administration? And that's another good point that he brought up in the book, was the geopolitics of everything. And that's how do you get contracts, government contracts? And that's kind of a scary deal, because you get government contracts through influence. You have to know the right people, and you have to qualify for the contract. And that is getting involved in politics. That's scary, but that is part of doing business. Oil companies do it, energy companies do it, you name it, Pfizer, drug companies, they're all kind of involved in that, in geopolitics. I think that something that, and I would have to do some research on this, but when you have a company contracted from a government to go to another nation on behalf of that other nation's government, that's one kind of contract. But what if you were a United States company contracted by, let's just use a random place like France, to go into Germany on behalf of France in order to stabilize, let's say, another area for another country? I think that's going to get complicated, but definitely is going on. It's probably went on with the Wagner group, probably did more than what I knew. I knew it in 2005 here in the United States, when Hurricane Katrina hit the New Orleans area. Blackwater was contracted by the federal government, to go down to New Orleans and provide security. They were on a federal contract. So here was a PMC going and working inside the United States on behalf of the federal government. But now there was other security companies that had private contracts to go down and work. So what if a PMC like Blackwater would have been contracted by a billionaire, a privately owned person, to go down there and to provide security? Now, on their company, I wouldn't say that that's a problem, but somebody that's very wealthy could very easily go in to another nation, let's say an African nation, and try to create political change. And if they have all the mechanisms in place to do that, it's kind of scary. Executive outcomes, they come to mind. And I think that was, I want to say, in the early 1990s in Africa, Angola, that they went down there, and they started initially training for the government, and then everything kind of blew up from there. So, there's been failures in the PMC world for sure. But also, wow, when you start creating these huge hydras that can do all of these different things, and organize them into one company. That's pretty scary. But that is where the future is going to go, for sure. Oh well, they've got to read the book. They need to read the book, and then they need to do some research on their own from wherever they live at. You're going to have security companies and private military companies in just about every country in the world doing some kind of work, and some of that even may be humanitarian, but they're still providing security for that. And you look at the conflicts that are going on. But yeah, pay attention to read the book, do some research about private military companies, and look into, a lot of people don't know this, but there's private intelligence companies out there. That was something I was kind of not aware of. I knew that our government, the CIA, contracted with individuals as well as had people on staff working, but there's private intelligence companies, and they not only will tell other companies what the trends are, but you get into corporate espionage and corporate security and a lot of different things. And now if you bring all that into one and you arm them up and you train them up really well, okay, that's kind of scary. But when you're aware of what's going on, you know what's going on, you read the book, do your research, and pay attention to what your government is doing and what the news is saying, and try to figure things out from there. Get multiple sources from your news. Never trust the media 100% and completely. And yeah, but they should definitely read the book. I highly recommend it.